A wise man told me we are never given a dream without being given the power to make it true. You'll have to work for it, though. I'm Ron Schneider. Back in the 60s, I grew up around California theme parks, dreaming that someday I could make my living with that same kind of magic. In 1971, I got my first performing job at Magic Mountain. The 40 years that followed were one wild ride. And these are the stories of others who had that same dream and made it come true. Welcome to Wild Rides. I'm Ron Schneider. Tom, Nabby, and I visited Disneyland for the very first time on the same day, July 18th, 1955, first day the park was open to the public. He was hired by the company the next day to sell the Disneyland News on Main Street and was soon promoted to the role of Tom Sawyer, thus becoming the first strolling character in a Disney theme park. Co-author of From Jungle Cruise Skipper to Disney Legend, 40 Years of Magical Memories at Disney, my guest is Tom Nabbe. Tom, welcome to Wild Rides.
Well, thank you for the intro. Thank you for promoting my book, too.
That's why we're here, buddy. You started, you were there with your toe in the door the very first day. Did you watch the opening special the day before?
Yeah, we watched that and then we walked over. My mother was a starlet wannabe, and she's an autographed hound. And she used to haul us all up to Hollywood to the premiere openings and that type of thing. Well, this was right up her alley, and we were able to, we only live 7/10 of a mile away from Disneyland. So we walked over, and she had her autograph books and was getting autographs from the various celebrities that were going in the park. Now, this is July 17th.
Right.
Okay. Danny Thomas was either going in the park or coming out. I think he was coming out. My mother asked him for an autograph, and he very cordially gave her his autograph, and then he sort of leaned forward and said, "Have you been in the park?" And she said, "Oh, no, we haven't been invited," or "we weren't invited." And he said, "Well, I got a couple tickets. You want them?" And her eyes lit up, and she said, "Absolutely." And so he gave her 2 tickets, and my mother and I went into the park as guests of Danny Thomas on the premiere opening on July 17, 1955.
I remember reading that in the book, and I went immediately to my tape of the opening day festivities, the live broadcast, and showed Danny Thomas walking into the park with his family. And I didn't see you, so it must have been when he was walking out.
Oh, could be.
And that was what we used to do. We would get Disneyland passports when they started doing passports. We would go into the park, have our fun of the day, but then as we were leaving the park, I like to find people who didn't have tickets and give them the passport so they could go in and go on the rides.
Yeah, well, you had to exchange the handstand.
Right. Well, yeah, there was that too. So you go into the park. You got yourself a job selling papers.
Well, actually, the job offer came before that. When we moved to Anaheim from Los Angeles, I wanted a paper route. And Anaheim was considered rural, and you had to have a driver's license. Well, at 12, I was going to have a driver's license. But I was able to get a Sunday paper route. And what I do is I had about 25 clients in the neighborhood, and then my manager would drop off whatever extra papers he had, and I had a little wagon, and I hooked onto the back of my bicycle, and I'd pedal over to the Harbor Gate. I don't think there's ever been a gate on the Harbor Gate until after 9/11. Well, we'd get to the Harbor Gate, and right then they were working 3 shifts, and I tried to get there in the morning when the 3rd shift was getting off, and I would sell Sunday newspapers. A gentleman by the name of Ray Ahmet and his brother Joe had the Castle News concession on Main Street. And he basically told me, he says, you show up early in the morning before the park opens and get newspapers, and if you sell 100 papers outside, we'll let you continue to sell papers and go inside the park. And so on the 19th, I took Joe up on his offer, met him out in front of the gate that morning, and sold my 100 papers in a heartbeat. People standing in line, and there he had to stand in line to buy a ticket, to stand in line to give a ticket to the ticket seller. And I did that all that summer. If you notice in my book also, there's a picture of me with Jerry Lewis and Milton Berle.
Right.
And I'm 12 years old in that picture, just turned 12. Somebody told me in September of '55 that Walt had just announced that he's going to build Tom Sawyer's Island. And Walt was in the park quite frequently back then. And so I sold my 100 papers outside, got the permission to come inside, sell some, and I tracked Walt down behind his apartment on Main Street and introduced myself and told him I looked just like Tom Sawyer, and I heard he was going to build Tom Sawyer's Island and he should hire me. Well, he didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. He said he'd think about it. So the next year, anytime I could find Walt, I would in turn ask him if he was still thinking about hiring me to Tom Sawyer. And about a year later, in May, I think it was in May, it could have been early June, but I think it was in May that I was playing the baseball machine in the Penny Arcade.
I remember that machine.
Yeah, I love that baseball machine in the Penny Arcade. And Dick Nunes, I think some of us would know who that is, but Dick was the supervisor of Frontierland back at that time for him. And he tapped me on the shoulder and he says, "Tom, come with me." And and if Dick says come with me, you you don't argue with Dick.
It's a fear of God thing.
Yeah, a little bit on that. So we went over to Frontierland, and as we were walking over the bridge by the chicken plantation, I could see the raft coming back from the island, and Walt and Morgan Evans, Bill Evans, landscape architect, was on the raft, and Dick and I walked down on the dock and met Walt and Bill when the raft landed. And Walt said, and understand, Walt was real easy to talk to for a kid. He had child actors and all the Mickey Mouse Club members and that type thing, and a couple teenage daughters. And so it was fairly easy to talk to. And he says, "Tom, you still want to be Tom Sawyer?" And I told him, "Absolutely, Mr. Disney." And he said, "Okay, you need to get a work permit and a Social Security card." And he knew all the information. So, and I said, "Okay." So I did that. Getting the work permit, the Social Security card was no challenge. Just went to the office in Santa Ana and filled out the form and got the Social Security card. Work permit was a little bit more of a challenge. I had to get a form from school, had to take it into the employment office and get it filled out. Well, that's where the first challenge was. When I went into the employment office and told the lady that I've been hired to be Tom Sawyer, and I needed this form to be filled out, she asked me to have a seat, and she went in and told Chuck Whalen, who was the manager of employment at that time. And employment was in a little house on West Street that they didn't tear down, that they kept as an employment office. And Dick Nunes knew all about it. So he called Dick and told him that he had this kid over here, and that said that Walt hired him, but Dick, we don't hire kids. And this side of the story I hear from Dick. Dick took a little bit of a deep breath and said, "Chuck, let your conscience be your guide. Walt hired him." And at that point, all my paperwork got filled out, and I went to work as a face character on Tom Sawyer's Island. Now, if you look at it, the island opened on June 16th, 1956. Okay, my employment started on June 18th, 1956. So any of the press pictures or that type of thing that you see of the opening of Tom Sawyer's Island, that's the winners of the Hannibal Becky Thatcher and Tom Sawyer contest were invited there, and that's who's in the picture. That's not me. Okay, and I worked all through junior high school, all through high school as a character Tom Sawyer. You had to be 18 years of age in order to operate an attraction at Disneyland. So the day of my 18th birthday, I went from what they called, my classification was guest aide, to an attractions ride operator. And I got a pretty good pay raise. My pay was when I started was minimum wage, and that was 75 cents an hour. And every time minimum wage went up, I got a raise. Okay, and when I turned 18, I became eligible for ride operator pay, and I went all the way to, I think it was a $1.86 an hour.
An embarrassment of riches.
Oh boy, that was that was great. And back then, Disneyland was closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, and so the Sunday night at the end of summer of 1961, Jim Hott, my supervisor, handed me a spiel for the Jungle Cruise, and basically said, Wednesday morning, report to the Jungle Cruiser's jungle operator. And I said, okay. So I memorized the spiel, and on Wednesday morning, I made my 3 OJT trips with a trainer. And I think it was Earl Archer was my trainer, but I can't totally remember who it was. And after the 3rd trip, bless you, my son, you're now a fledged Jungle Cruise operator. And I would work the Jungle Cruise in the wintertime, and I'd work TSI, Tom Sawyer's Island, in the summertime.
Were you still doing Tom?
No. I was a ride foreman. They had held a contest in 1961 in the Anaheim Bulletin, and they replaced me with a kid by the name of Keith Murdoch. And he lasted, he's in the book, he wrote a chapter in my book, and he lasted about 3 years. And he outgrew the part also.
Yeah. We all do.
Yeah.
When you started as Tom Sawyer, were you given any direction, any parameters of what they were expecting from you?
No, it was sort of learn as you go. Actually, they had stocked the rivers of America with bluegill, catfish, and sunperch, and had fenced in a little area on the fishing docks that were opposite the Mark Twain landing. And there was an older gentleman that was sort of in charge that time. His name was Raleigh Hughes, and he had retired out of the oil fields. He was a big man. His hands were just gigantic, but he taught me how to rig the fishing poles. It was a cane pole and a fishing line and a cork, a sinker, and a hook. And when we first opened up, it was a catch and clean program. So you caught your fish, and if you wanted to clean, get to clean it. I had that opportunity. I had a little cleaning station, and then I'd put it in a plastic bag. That only lasted a couple months because old dead fish started showing up in places in the month of August in Disneyland, and so we immediately went from a catch and clean program to a catch and release program, and I debarbed all the fishing hooks, okay, and had worms for bait. Reminds me of a story. My supervisor back that time, his name was Jim Hott, and he thought that the worm guy wasn't giving us our proper quantity of worms per flat. And there were supposed to be 350 worms in a flat. And so I had this is how I got into inventory my first time. Okay, so I had the opportunity to inventory this flat of worms, and we were getting more than our fair share of worms per flat. And I did 3 flats just to make sure it was. Now, to understand that the worms came packed in rabbit manure, and we'd have to take them from the rabbit manure and put them in the potting soil to put them out on the fishing dock. That was one of the challenges of being Tom Sawyer. Besides watching the fishing poles, repairing them, and helping the guests bait their hooks, I posed for pictures. And I would be either Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn. Didn't make any difference to me, whatever the guests wanted me to be. I wouldn't be Becky Thatcher or Indian Joe. I would pass at that point. And you sort of look at it, you got to read the books, and that's one thing that my mother asked me to do right after I got the job. And Tom Sawyer was sort of a sandy, blonde kid. Huckleberry Finn had the fire red hair.
Right.
Okay, and so a lot of the old timers at Disneyland used to call me Huck. Okay, so I had a nickname of Huck. So in turn, I became a ride operator. I worked every ride and attraction at Disneyland that had male operators, because a few of them only had female operators. And in some cases, the working foreman on the female rides were male operators. Things have changed drastically through the years. And then in late '64, I got a notice from my other uncle, Uncle Sam.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Uncle Sam sent me an invite to participate in a war in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam. And I sort of looked at it, and I had worked at Disneyland, hired a lot of Marines,
Yeah.
okay, from Camp Pendleton in that area. So I had a idea that if I was going to go into the service, in my opinion, the best train would be in the Marine Corps. But John Wayne was a Marine too, so you know, he was one of my idols. So I ended up enlisting in the Marine Corps. And back then, employers had an obligation to keep you on the payroll and to count the time that you were in service as time on the payroll. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps for a 3-year hitch. And the reason being, on a 3-year hitch, I had no active reserve requirements when I got out. And the reason being is the schedulers didn't like active reserve people because they were gone one weekend out of the month and gone 2 weeks out of the summer, and they had to work around their schedule. So I didn't want to fall into that category. So in turn, for some reason, I scored very high in electronics. And the Marine Corps made an aviation radio repairman out of me. But I joined the Marine Corps to see the world. I never got more than 82 miles from home during the height of the Vietnam War. Now, when I'm looking back on it, I think somebody up there was looking out for me. But in turn, every time I graduated from school, I got rank. I was a corporal less than a year in the Marine Corps in 1965, so that was pretty good rank-wise. And I had orders to go to Da Nang, and I had packed up all my stuff and had it in the trunk of the car, and had a couple buddies, and we were driving up from San Diego, and I was going to drop all my stuff up because and take the bus back home because I was going to be transferred out to Camp Pendleton and then Westpac. I called the battle of Highway 101 or Pacific Coast Highway. Had a drunk hit me head on and tried to kill me, put me in the hospital for 5 months, and I recovered from that and ended up getting mustered out of the Marine Corps on a medical discharge in 1968. In the meantime, I did get married. My wife we worked together. I worked a little bit in food in the Oaks Tavern in Frontierland, and she was the counter lead. And it was a transition time when UPT, United Paramount Theaters, ran all the concessions at Disneyland. Their contract ran out in 1965. Okay, so in turn, Disney got into the food business. So I went through a little bit of a training program there. Had met my future wife Janice, and I was on leave, waiting my discharge from the Marine Corps, and I gave her a call, and we started dating, and we got married in June of 1958. June is a very active month for me. I was born in June, I was hired in June, I got married in June, I retired in June, and Father's Day's in June. Okay, so all of those neat things happen in June. So that's a very active month for me.
How many kids you got?
I have my most favorite son.
Yeah.
Because I got one.
Well, that's the one.
Yeah, and he sort of followed in my footsteps a little bit. When he turned 16, 17, I got him a job at Disney, and it was in a area that he had to drive or handle any mechanics. And then as soon as he turned 18, he became a jungle skipper. Okay, and worked a lot of rides and attractions at Disneyland. Okay, so we'll get back to, I in turn got out of the Marine Corps, married. I had dreams of grandeur of being an electronical engineer, and went back to school at Cal State Fullerton on the GI Bill. And I realized about a year into it, that isn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in rides and attractions management at Disney. So I ended up getting a round of interviews and got a job offer in 1970 to train to open the monorail system at Walt Disney World. Now, I worked every ride and attraction at Disneyland with the exception of the steam train and the monorail. And the reason being, those two attractions were run by Retlaw.
Retlaw, yeah.
And in order to work for Retlaw as a male employee, you had to be 6 foot tall. And I was never going to be 6 foot tall because that's the size of the costumes that they had. But when I came and started training to operate the monorail in Florida, I had to train at Disneyland, so I did get to work the monorail, and I did get to work the steam trains. And I trained about a year with Retlaw on how to be a supervisor in the rides and attracts area. We relocated to Florida in January of 1970. And experience, first thing getting here was, it was colder than ever. I'm colder than it's ever been in Southern California.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I hit a couple rainstorms, and I had never seen rainstorms. Raindrops the size of Volkswagens were coming from the heavens. So there was a pretty good indoctrination to the climate of Florida and Orlando. And the humidity was something else. It took me several years to get acclimated to the humidity. I used to go through 2 and 3 shirts. Well, in turn I got here, Martin was assembling the monorails, so I spent most of my day at Martin, and then the afternoons I would go out to the Magic Kingdom and check on the monorail stations and that. And that's opened that system up in 1971. Okay, I worked that for about a year, and then the company decided to build this little island in the rivers of America called Tom Sawyer's Island. So I transferred from the transportation side of the business into the park, into Frontier Land Liberty Square operations. And during the construction of Tom Sawyer's Island, I sort of got tagged as a nuts and bolts guy. So I sort of got involved in projects and that type of thing. So went through the building of Tom Sawyer's Island and the Richard F. Irvine, the second steamboat. That opened, and we did the same thing for the opening of Tom Sawyer's Island. And I want to say that was in June or May of 73, I think, is when the island opened up. And we invited the winners of the Tom Sawyer and Becky Thatcher contest to come out and to participate in the press opening of Tom Sawyer's Island. And then just right after that, I got transferred to Tomorrowland. And we were going to build Space Mountain, Starjets, Wedway, and GE Carousel of Progress. So that was a pretty good size. There wasn't a whole lot in Tomorrowland when we opened Walt Disney World. And so went through that entire construction. We opened Space Mountain in January of 1975. And then right after that, I had the opportunity to go to Fantasyland. And the decision was to make in Fantasyland to refurbish 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And what the problem with 20K is the water that was going through there was pumped out of the aquifer. And it had some stale areas and that type thing, and a lot of algae was growing in it. Originally, when the art directors came down here, they went to Silver Springs, and they saw how pristine the water was, so they basically said, well, we aren't going to put a filtration system in on 20,000 leagues. We'll just pump the water out of the aquifer. And the whole process was pumped out of the aquifer into 20,000 leagues. From there, it went into the moat. From the moat, it went into the Jungle Cruise. From the Jungle Cruise, went into the Rivers of America. From the Rivers of America, went down the Lifeboat Channel into Seven Seas Lagoon, was disseminated across the property of the 55 miles of drainage canals that we built before opening. Okay, so the decision was to shut down 20K, totally refurbish it, and to put in a chlorinating filtration system, because prior to that time, every morning the divers had to go down and scrub the fish down and scrub the mermaids down and clean the algae off the portholes.
Yeah, because the submarine voyage at Disneyland has its own filtration system.
Yes, it did.
But,
It was a big swimming pool. Actually, it was heavily chlorinated. If you go back into the late 50s, early 60s,
the mermaids.
We actually had mermaids out there, but the chlorine would turn their hair green. And so after got 20K open, I ended up having the opportunity I got promoted into the manager level and went back to Frontierland Liberty Square. Because we're going to build this little attraction there called Big Thunder. Okay, and Disneyland built it first. There was a toss-up for a long time, and Disneyland got the opportunity to build it first, and then Walt Disney World was going to build it. So in turn, we built Big Thunder. I had the opportunity to go out to Disneyland and actually operate the attraction out there, which is sort of neat. And we got Big Thunder open and operating, and I ended up getting a telephone call that basically said, do you want to participate in Epcot? And I told Norm Durges, yes, I do.
Join me next time for more with Disney legend Tom Nabbe.